Hello. I hope this is actually recording. And I'm sorry, Aaron, that I'm using your login, apparently. Yeah. I'm Aaron today, and Aaron's gonna be animating. No, I'm just kidding. If anyone has any idea of what I should be talking about specifically today, if you have any questions, please let me know, because, yeah, I'm just gonna be animating again. I don't really know what I'm going to talk about, but hopefully something interesting will happen, so ask questions if you will. Today I'm in the middle of an animation. I guess I should probably explain a little bit what I was animating previous to this. Talk about why Mugu are so Mugu. I don't know! They just are. I feel like you could get into all sorts of philosophy about why Mugu and Mugu. You'd have to ask Caroline. She did a lot of the narrative work for that. Let's see. Right, for those of you who don't know what I'm doing, which I don't think is anyone watching right now. I think everybody watching is probably already knows what I'm doing at the moment, but I'm basically animating a very short animation for the gardener to be used in the narrative screen of the game. And the idea is that when the player presses A to finish the cutscene or skip the cutscene, the gardener will pull one of the levers on the spaceship. I don't know if you can see my hand movements. But anyway, so before that, I was working on her idol, which isn't so much of an idol for the narrative screen as it is kind of Hackerman typing. I will just briefly display what that looks like. Well, it's not looping 100% because it actually loops at 90, not 30. Anyway, this is Hackerman the gardener, and this is what her idol is. Basically, while you can see the thing flipping in the background. That's really funny. That thing's not supposed to move until the other animation, but I'm working on the other one, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, this is what she's going to be doing. The camera angle, yeah, angry little face. The camera angle is somewhere over here. And you're just kind of watching her type, and then she will have her narrative kind of screen that shows up and kind of displays what she's typing and what she's thinking, along with a voice clip so you can hear what she's saying. Anyway, so that's what she's doing, and then as soon as the player hits A, I'm working on the other animation where she leans over and pulls the lever, like that. So I'm gonna start this looping at 30 again, just because it's not that long. It's only 10 frames at the moment, I think, 12, yeah. I'm gonna lengthen it. I think today is mostly just gonna be me going over how I edit after like a first draft of my animations, because I've already basically done most of the movement for this. So the idea is that it has to be a kind of snappy animation because the player is pressing A. You want her to immediately jump into action so that the player knows that they've clicked a button and that the game recognizes it and they get that feedback. I also don't want it to be too fast that you can't read the movement, and that's kind of the trade-off between with game animation, is that you have to give the player feedback, and on the other hand, you also still have to make all the actions readable. So you have to kind of find that sweet spot in timing where you can see the motion and your brain can understand it, and it's not going too fast that it becomes choppy and you don't really know what's going on. But you also need to have it be fast enough that the player recognizes that, yes, this is something that happened because I did something. So that is kind of where I'm at the moment, is just trying to figure out the timing, which happens a lot in the dope sheet or the action editor. I really don't know what the difference is. I guess the dope sheet shows you everything that's being animated currently in the scene. That's my best guess. Tells you how much I know about animation, jeez. Go back to the action editor just because it is specifically for the action that I'm animating. Is this the old botanist you control? Maybe she can be slow in her movements. Yeah, that's a good point. The gardener kind of exists in this weird state of being old and kind of like, not decrepit, I don't really know what the word is, but she's just kind of, she looks like she would be frail, and then she's not. That's kind of the idea is that you expect one thing, and then she's actually pretty fast. I tried to capture that with her walk animation, which I don't have in this file, but the idea is that you're kind of a little off-put by her, that she looks like she should be slow, and yet she actually moves pretty quickly for an old bird, or alien in this case. But there's definitely some stuff that I need to slow down in this animation. I think the arm movement, for one, is a little bit too fast, because in my opinion, I look at that and I'm like, well, yes, she did flip the switch, but it also just kind of looks like her arm is bouncing. Like, it's kind of hard to read that she is actually flipping the switch. If I slow it down, you get to see the whole motion, and that kind of makes more sense. But at that speed, it just looks like it's kind of bumping along. The other problem, I think, inherently is just that when I put her in her idle position, I kind of placed her slightly off center, so she's not closer to this one, which is the one I wanted to use for this animation, just because it's closer to the camera. I could go back and edit her Hackerman idle, I'm just going to keep calling it that, so that she's kind of closer to this side, but then you wouldn't see as much of the keyboard, and I don't know. Just trying to find the best spot to do something. What I didn't want was her arms popping. This happens when you have an IK arm and you go past its range without having any stretching on. With this rig, I actually adjusted it from the one I had before, because the in-game rig, the one that's not used for this narrative scene specifically, has stretchiness, and you can actually stretch your arms. But for this one, I wanted a better IK rig, so I actually re-rigged the arms so it was a little bit easier to animate. And they don't have stretchiness, so this is what happens. You can see the elbow, and then it kind of pops out of spot, and then anything past that, it's just perfectly straight, because that's as far as it can go. So I'm trying to avoid that. And largely I had to pick this side just because it's physically closer to her, and I didn't want her stepping over here to try to make up for some of that space, just because with an animation that's only 12 frames long, that's a lot of movement that her legs have to do within a very short amount of time, and that's not very readable generally. That's too fast. That's too much stuff happening at the same time. Will there be any Mugu in this scene? It's a good question. There is actually. It's kind of hard to tell because this thing blocks the way. But if I hide that, you can see that there's a Mugu floating in some sort of hologram hover chamber thing. I'm not entirely sure what it would be called, but there is one Mugu in the scene. Although it's not animated in the same way. Like, I don't have a rig applied to it. Oh, wow. That's a weird view. So it's not like it could blink or twitch its leg or anything like that. Like, it's just gonna hover. I think that would be kind of fun to have a whole bunch of Mugu. The other thing about this scene is that this particular scene, the narrative scene, is actually still a work in progress. And what you see here is not probably gonna look at all like what the end result will be. So I don't want to devote too much time to setting up everything and having a whole bunch of things animated when I know that the mesh and the structure of the scene is going to change. With this kind of animation, it's pretty easy to go back and just generally adjust her pose. Like, if I wanted to take her hand and I wanted to lower it so that overall it's lower, because maybe I lowered the desk or something, that's actually easy enough to do, because I could just go down, find the X location, which is that one, and then just kind of drag the entire graph up and down, and you'll see that that lowers it. Obviously I'd have to do a little bit of offset because it's not perfectly level with the ground. It's kind of tilted like this, so it moves in this direction instead of this way. But that's not too hard. If I had a bunch of Mugu running around, I would have to also offset all of their movement, which may or may not be worth the time, and it may be not worth the time. It just kind of depends, I suppose. That is a good idea. I actually really like that. I think it'd be hilarious if she had a whole bunch of Mugu just taking over the place. Because they are kind of invasive. That's part of the lore of them, is that they just go everywhere and mess everything up. Anyway, my mouse is being weird today. Stop being weird, mouse. Okay. Sometimes if you yell at things somewhat gently, they'll listen some of the time. Don't take my word on that, though. I'm also noticing that there is definitely a twitch that happens. If you watch her head specifically, you can see that it kind of twitches. She's a Mugu lady instead of a cat lady. Yes, accurate. I support this decision 100%. Although she's kind of mean to her Mugu. I guess they don't care, though. Yes. I'm hoping that this head twitch is evident. I could go through and kind of try to show it. So, looking at this, her head is starting to move. I wonder if I could just use my grease pencil. That might actually help here. Grease pencil. This might make a little more sense if I can actually draw this motion instead of just replaying the same thing over and over and over again. So you'll notice in the first part of this that her head is moving in this direction. Like that. Why you no do the thing? I don't understand. Sometimes it does that on me and I don't know why. Anyway, hopefully you could see that line before it up and disappeared on me. Yes. That would be awesome to have a sequel. Oh my goodness. All the Mugu. I swear, half of this is just me trying to figure out Blender when I already feel like I know some parts of Blender, and then it just is like, but you don't. And I'm just gonna show you while you're trying to figure it out on the stream. Never get this grease pencil. I don't understand. Anyway, whatever. Back to this. You can see that she's going in one direction, and then between frames 6 and 7, she kind of changes the direction that she's going in. So if you looked at it from the top down, I suspect that it goes something like this. And you get this kind of not very nice right angle. Yeah, you can see she goes one direction, and then at 7, she starts going forward. And then kind of continues. So that's not a very nice curve. You can see that she's... literally, it's between frame 6 and 7 that she's doing that. Which is not good, because it makes it look kind of like she's shaking, and it's not a very fluid action. So what that means is that I have to figure out which bone, or set of bones, is causing that kind of popping. And I think I know which one it is. It's not actually the head, because you'll notice down here, if I remove this, the head only has 3 sets of keyframes, and they're all very smooth. Whereas if I click on this one, the upper torso or ribs or whatever I called it, you can see here, between 6 and 7, it actually rotates forward. And this way, apparently. Left and right, and I think red is probably, yeah. It also steeply rotates forward. And the reason I did that when I was running through the first pass is to sell the idea that she's really pushing on that lever before she actually starts pushing it. With that said, it's a bit too much of a rotation, I think, and it's causing the head to look like it's twitching. That or it's just too fast. Many ways to solve this problem. Basically, what I think is happening is there's too much movement with too little amount of time. And so I could solve it by moving this bone less, or I could give it more time to move there, so it would be slower. Either way, that would make it slower. So I'm kind of thinking that I do really want to exaggerate the fact that she's pushing on this lever. So I might actually decrease the time. Sorry, increase the time. If I decreased it, would be sitting on 0 frames, and that just means that keyframe basically doesn't exist. Let's see. I almost want it to be two actions. They're not separate per se. I was going to say 2 separate actions, but they're not necessarily separate. I want the first part, I think, to be her kind of winding up and putting her hand on the lever, and then shoving it forward would be the second action. So if I delay this part enough, it kind of separates the two. Like 1, 2, 1, 2. Which also means I need to now adjust the timing of this bone, which might be easier in the dope sheet. Okay. Lever. That would be this one. These are 2 separate rigs right now. The narrative scene has its own rig, which is literally just the levers that I can rotate at the moment. That's all I've rigged for it. That's all I really needed. And then the gardener. The camera has an action on it simply because I wanted to try out different camera angles, and I didn't want to have to undo a bunch to go back to whatever spot I was in before, so I just set a bunch of keyframes. I don't intend to import that into Unity. I don't need that camera animation. And I still think that the second part is way too fast. Her actually pushing the lever is 4 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Now I'm scared. Move body parts. That's gonna be fun to model. Let's see. I'm also trying to figure out who you are, Cryptic Hybrid. I don't think I've seen your tag on this chat before, but I feel like maybe I just have a terrible memory. If you're someone downstairs, hello. And if you're someone who's not downstairs, hello also. What if you had Mugu that were mashed together, like they literally took the head of a fire Mugu and the body of a heavy Mugu and just kind of stitched them together, kind of Frankenstein style? What would that look like animated? I don't even know. If its head was like flopping around, it wasn't quite sewed on properly. Can we please make a Halloween like DLC that's just the gardener stitching Mugu together? Oh, undead Mugu. Man, that definitely needs to be a thing if we make like a DLC or a second game or something. That'd be awesome. Or maybe it wouldn't. I actually hate zombies, so maybe I wouldn't like that as much, but... First time when you're on the channel. Well, cool. Hello. Thanks for chatting. I think I'm going to select all these, except that one. That keyframe is kind of the follow-through keyframes. Yeah, so that's not part of the actual pushing motion. So I'll move that guy out of the way. And then I'll hit caps locks a bunch of times, because I always hit caps locks, even when I don't want to. Okay. I'm thinking scaling it up by half, or by, well, 2, making it twice as long. That's much smoother. The first part of the animation is now not quite as readable. This part here, where she's winding up. Because the rest of the animation is slower now, this part just kind of blends into it, I think. This is very much a timing problem, this cleaning up this animation. It's not too difficult with curves. There's not too many, I think, keyframes that are completely out of place or in the wrong spot. I think it's just timing. sometimes I'll have something where I'll have something twitching weirdly and I'll wonder why, and then I'll look at the graph and it'll be like crazy all over the place, and then I was like, oh, you know, that makes sense. But timing is a little bit harder for me to figure out. Probably because I'm still learning. It just means I have to watch this several hundred times from several different angles. And at some point I should probably save my work, because I have a habit of having things crash on me. Which is weird, because Blender's usually really stable. That face, oh my goodness. I think this part needs to be slowed down if I slow this down. Alternatively, instead of snapping these to the nearest frame, I could just not snap them and then they don't scale weirdly. You'll notice if I have snap to the nearest frame, sometimes you'll get, I want to point at the screen, sometimes you'll get stuff like what's happening in the middle, like those middle two keyframes where the spacing isn't exactly right. You'll have the first keyframe, then 2 frames, and then the second keyframe, and then 1 frame, which is not correct spacing, and then another 2 frames after that. Whereas I want all of these to be uniform. So if I turn off frame snapping, I can just kind of scale them and they'll stay approximate to each other. So maybe I don't want twice, maybe I want half. Like 3/4 of the speed. This makes sense in my head, and then I say it out loud and go, yep, that math's horribly wrong, but that's okay. Still a little bit fast. When working with such small amount of frames, up until probably like a few days ago, honestly, was content to just have frames be stuck and have stuff where I should have 1.5 frames in between a keyframe, and I only could work with either 1 frame or 2 because I didn't realize that you could turn off snapping. Don't know how I got here without realizing that you could turn off frame snapping and have frames that exist, you know, not on an actual frame but somewhere in the middle. Still learning things apparently. Pretty sure that's a pretty important one. Definitely gives me a lot more freedom because now it's continuous and not like discrete numbers. Can actually use decimals, which is good for timing. It also kind of means that stuff is going to start to look really funky in the timeline, which is its own problem. Nevertheless, timing is important. I'm also thinking that there's no slow in and slow out with this. It's very much I guess it does have a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it does, and that's kind of the important thing. I think I need this to be much slower to really pick up later. So it's kind of an effort. It's kind of a little bit of effort for her to actually pull this lever. I want to give the sense that the lever is not stuck, but it just takes a little bit of time to actually get to the point that it's at. Oh, she's going on her toes. Sorry, I don't know when you commented that, but her one toe lifts up. This is something that I did with this rig that if I had given myself more time to work on the rig specifically, I would have changed, but this rig does not come with a nice foot roll setup, so what I have to do is actually rotate and move the foot to offset it. So it's not just rolling nicely, it's actually rotating the foot and sliding it forward so that it doesn't look like it's just rotating into the floor, basically, which is annoying to animate, but I didn't have to deal with it too much. Usually I can offset it enough that it doesn't look too bad. So I was just saving some time there, but you'll notice that the foot kind of jiggles a little bit, like the toe. I keep wanting to point at the screen, don't know why. The toe kind of wobbles in and out, which is not good, but because of the angle that I know the camera is going to be at, I'm content to leave it for now. In theory, she should probably be going on her toes on both feet, just because it's quite a bit of a stretch for her to reach all the way over there. Luckily, her rig is also stretchy in the torso, so that allows me a little bit of wiggle room to just kind of stretch her out a little bit so that she can reach places. Whoa. Right. Forgot where I was in the animation. So now you'll notice that this is incorrect. And that's because I'm using an IK rig that has no relation to this bone at all whatsoever, so that basically means I have to counter animate. Not counter animate, but specifically animate where her hands are on this. Which isn't honestly too bad because it's an arc, like this only rotates in one direction. It makes sense to me looking at the curves, and I'll try to explain that once I finish doing this. Usually the curves make sense. Oh, what is happening here? Ah, yes, the other thing that happens when you don't have auto snap on. When you're trying to overwrite keyframes, you have to exactly match them. Because you're no longer snapping to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to match 1.2347, which is a lot harder to do. Yeah, there is definitely ways to constrain the hand to follow this bone. In theory, what I could do is actually make another bone off this one. Oh, that's not the correct button. Here we go. If I made one coming up like this, say. So now this bone is parented to this hand, or to this lever, sorry. I can then take the hand, add a constraint. In theory, this would work. Child of, and then find the narrative scene rig. That would be that one. In theory, if this wasn't also animated, that should work. Maybe I will do that. Problem is I'd have to keyframe this so that the influence isn't always 1, because the hand isn't always following the lever. But that's what this bone constraint does. It basically allows you to make a parent-child relationship and then animate the parent-child relationship influence. Yes, there's more than one way to do this, but that's a good idea. Maybe I will just do that. If I delete these keyframes, let's see what happens. Okay, so minus the rotation that seems to be happening right now. And the fact that this is now offset. You seem to be fine here, so I'm assuming you don't need these. This is something that, yeah, her poor wrist, indeed. If she didn't have arthritis or carpal tunnel before, she doesn't have to worry about either of those because she's got a broken wrist. Just kidding, that's not how that works at all, probably, but don't ask me for medical advice, that's all I'm saying. I wonder if I can counter animate that and rotate this. That's not fun, but I might just do that anyway. Either way, you're gonna have to animate something. Unfortunately, the rig cannot do absolutely everything. The thing I was worried about... Oh, no, this makes sense. The thing I was worried about was there's an IK bone structure set up, and IK constraints always get applied last. So if you try to apply a bunch of constraints to the arm bones, the IK will override them. It's considered a separate constraint as far as Blender is concerned, I think. But because this hand bone is actually the target and not part of the IK structure, it means you can't actually use other constraints and the IK won't override it, which I forgot about, so thank you for suggesting that. I wonder if this looks okay. Now I have to figure out... Feels like I'm probably just gonna be counter animating this no matter what I do. And it's simply because her wrist is actually rotating. Like she's kind of sliding her hand, or glove I guess, along this lever as she pulls it. Because otherwise she does break her wrists. Oh man. My mouse is doing weird things. That's okay. So because this bone has an animation curve that looks like this, you can see that it's not a regular curve. I've made this keyframe a vector handle, which means that it's very sharp. Basically, I can break the... If I had another keyframe, I'll show you what I mean. If I make this auto clamped, it smooths it out, makes it all nice. If I use vector, I can break the line, basically, and it becomes sharp. I don't actually need that keyframe, though. So, usually, you would have a curve that looks kind of like that, and it's got your ease in and your ease out, but I want it to be a lot of ease in and no ease out, basically, at all. Like I was saying earlier, I want it to really have that slow in and then kind of like a ka-chunk. Definitely that is exactly what I'm thinking. I think in terms of sound effects. Look at those jowls. Oh my goodness, I know. She looks very determined. That's one thing I really appreciate about this particular model's, like the way the eyebrows were set up. You can do all sorts of really funny things with the eyebrows. And I didn't have to spend too much time weight painting that to get a nice deformation. The edge flows worked really well for that. So this is why you always make nice topology when you're animating faces, because then you can do stuff like this with your eyebrows. I was doing eyebrow things last week apparently, which I wasn't even thinking about, so this week it's intentional eyebrows. Last week it was unintentional eyebrows. So with the slow ease in basically means that all of these minus scale, don't need those. This is probably really hard to look at, and I apologize. These guys. Anyway, all these curves also have to have that same slow in, and then basically they all stop. So I'm hoping, if I understand math and graphs correctly, if I make those vectors, that should help. Yeah, it does. Okay. Okay. It's still a little bit fast. What direction are we going in here? Y. Okay. What's this one? Nope, this one. Usually local actually gives me the correct orientation. This should be going in and out. Oh, it is. Sort of. That doesn't look like this is following this. Weird. don't think it's a rotation problem, so I'm gonna hide those. This is not behaving exactly the way I'd expected it to behave, but that's okay. Just have to finagle it. 98% of me animating anything is just me sort of figuring it out right at the very end. It needs to go down, but this needs to go that direction, and this... that's not right. That graph is entirely wrong. What is happening right now? What happens if I move this over here? What does the graph look like? This is literally me trying to problem solve. This is 98% of what I do is just kind of move everything around. Oh, okay. So sometimes if I can't figure out a curve with the keyframes I have available, like right now, couldn't figure out what it was doing, I'll sometimes just move it into the position that I want it to be in and then look at where the keyframes are, and then I can kind of figure out what shape the graph was supposed to be. I'm not going to keep these keyframes here, obviously, but for my purposes, it allows me to get the right graph instead of derping around for 20 minutes trying to figure out why this didn't look correct. Problem is, this only works for the keyframe that it's on. And if I add a keyframe here, it might actually mess up something over here. That's interesting. This one looks like it actually has to kind of go this way. I'm not entirely sure why, though. Math. Punch. That's not too bad. There's a little bit of sliding that's going on there, but at the angle you can see it. Should be okay. Yeah. The camera up at the top shows where the camera is in Unity, approximately. It should be really close. I think the only difference is the depth of field might be a little bit different in Blender. Just because I couldn't quite import the settings. But that should be okay. What do I think about this? That's a pretty weak wrist at that point, looking at that. I feel like it would be more like this. Because if you're putting all of your force from your, whatever this muscle is, I forget, tricep, and your bicep, and basically literally all the muscles in your upper and lower arm, if you're putting all of your force into this part of your wrist and the thing that you're pushing is up here, you're just going to rotate your wrist around the object. You're not actually going to push it, or else you're going to strain your wrist. So I feel like this position doesn't look natural to me. That looks very broken. Also, there's no way that your wrist can actually physically do that, but she's kind of jelly, so I'm willing to break the conventions of anatomy just a little bit. Not that much, though. Which means I have to fix this. Okay. Ooh, look at that curve. That is weird. What happens if I What happens if I rotate this the other way? What does it do? Rude. Give me this handle, please. That's fine. Okay. Just assuming those curves need to be like that, but I haven't seen what it does yet, so. I guess it's not, okay, I remembered why it's not behaving exactly the way I expected. I expect this Y like graph to move it in this direction. Problem is it's parented to something, which is rotating. I did this to myself. This bone should not be rotating. Which means if I go back here to bone and I delete the parent, and then, yep, that makes sense, not following it anymore. If I add a copy location to that bone, which is what, this one? This one. Now, if I rotate this, you'll see that this top bone doesn't rotate at all. It always points up. That's what I wanted. I was wondering why it was being so weird. Okay. Now, in theory, that just did all the work for me. I should be able to delete these and these. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So this thing is doing all the counter rotating for me. Basically what was happening, if I didn't make that very clear, my hand bone here was parented to this bone, which was rotating with its parent. And I didn't want that rotation because it meant that I have to counter animate the hand. And because I don't want to do math or look at graphs for more than I have to, longer than I have to, if I tell Blender that no, I don't want this bone to inherit the rotation, then I don't have to rotate. So I'm feeling like that's a good thing, and I'm glad I figured that out while we were sitting here. This is exactly where rigging comes into play. If your rigger sets up stuff in such a way that you don't have to counter animate things like I was trying to do, it saves you so much time. And that's why sometimes I will spend a little bit more time working on a rig for something, because I know that there's going to be a situation where I'm going to need the wrist to do something like this, or I'm going to need to switch between IK, FK for the arms. If I want them to rotate in arcs, swinging wildly, an FK rig does that really well. But if I want them to hold on to something or like climb a wall, IK does that really well. So sometimes it's worth adding those extra features in a rig that allow you to isolate rotations or things that just kind of do the counter animation for you so that the animator doesn't have to. Lesson learned, don't just willy-nilly parent things. Okay, so at this point, that's not too bad, but if I rotate it like this, it's kind of hard to see because that other thing. There we go. Yeah, okay. Maybe something like that. Oh, and the reason that I added that extra bone, I didn't even ever explain that, but the reason I added the extra bone is because if I parented it to this bone, it takes the tail of the bone. Is that the tail or the head? I don't remember. I feel like I explained this in an early one, but I don't remember. This part of the bone is considered the parent, usually. And because this is rotating, I would still be in the same position I was in before where I had to counter animate for that rotation. That's why I added the extra bone so that I could then isolate the rotation so that it just stays up and down, and then it means that I can animate this however I want. This basically acts as world space, if that makes sense. An IK rig moves in world space. It orients itself based on the Z up, Y depth, and then X left and right. Different in Unity, obviously, but that's how it does it in Blender. So having something that doesn't inherit any rotation from anything basically acts as a world space coordinate for any of the children parented to it. I don't know if that made any sense. That made sense to me. Basically, if you parent something, the child object of that parent inherits all the locations, the rotations, and the scaling of its parent. Which is why if you have something in Unity that is scaled non-uniformly, if I take a cube, scale it by 2 this way and 4 this way, and then shrink it down depth-wise, if I then parent something to that and then try to rotate that, it will skew really weirdly and do all sorts of really strange things, because according to its world, like its world space that it's using, everything is scaled non-uniformly. And it's the same thing in Blender. That's fundamentally how stuff like this can work. This doesn't take in any rotations from its parent, so its coordinates will always stay upright with the world space. Math. It's basically all matrices at the end of the day, and I don't remember very much about those other than their math, and I'm not very good at math. Back to this. Glad we figured that out. I would have been kicking myself if I'd remembered that I could have just isolated the rotation after the fact. I don't know if I want the arm to settle quite like that. Right, it's this bone. Yes I do. That looks really that does not look correct. This, however, it's weirding me out. That's just a little too high. You really probably want the force of her push to be this way. Oh, now it sticks. Why weren't you sticking there before? I don't understand. Must have had some setting turned on or something. Oh well. Still not getting that kerchunk. I don't really know how to describe that other than the first part is the cur and the next part is the chunk. And like, I want the first part to go and then really get that pause and then the follow through. It's almost like it pauses in the middle. Just a little bit. I have no idea why sound effects make so much sense to me when I'm animating, but they do. This is all stuff that I'd be thinking in my head. And if you watched me animate and I wasn't trying to tell you what I was doing and why, I would just be sitting there kind of probably making eyebrows and doing silly things. And then in my head I'd be making all these sound effects just to try to figure out how everything works. So I kind of want to try this. If I make this... Nope, this one. I visualized the scene with sound effects. I don't know why that works, it just does. Because if I think of like a kerchunk noise, it is separate into 2 parts, and there is actually a pause in between the 2 of them, and that's why I'm about to test this. Hopefully, something like this will actually be what I want. So I added another keyframe in the middle, sort of. I'm going to turn off snapping and regret it probably, but something like that. Pause. Yeah. We need this to be a little bit slower. Which means that I need to drag this and this. Yeah, that's exactly right. Also, thank you. Forgot to say thank you. Rude of me. It's kind of interesting that stuff like that can be connected in your brain. Like, to me, that makes a lot of sense that sound effects can also help visualize something, even though they're 2 different senses. This is my concentrated face. I see that elbow popping and I don't appreciate it. This is what happens when you turn auto snap off. This is bad. One of these is correct and the other one is an imposter and should not be there. And I don't know which one it is, so I'm just gonna delete one of them and call it good. That's probably fine. It's these keyframes that I'd like to move. What is happening here with the ribs? That probably needs to move too. This, okay. I really want to draw that part out. Yeah, do you see that? That's the motion that I was kind of thinking. That's a little exaggerated, but that's kind of the idea, is that it does pause in the middle. I don't want it to be too aggressive. And closer to the start, I don't actually want it to be right in the middle. Chunk, after all, does take a little bit longer to say than the first part. So, I'm kind of thinking that's what I want for the arm. Can you see it? Can you see the kerchunk, kerchunk, kerchunk? Something like that. Can you see the words that I'm saying? I'm thinking that's what I want for the arm, which means that the body now has to follow suit. Because right now her body is not following that brief pause. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like it's got its own wind-up animation, just a little bit. I forget what that there is one of the 12 principles of animation. My knee just popped. I don't know if that picked up on the microphone. Is anticipation. So there is a bit of anticipation with that. Like, she starts to move it, and it's kind of getting ready in that first part. The cur part is the anticipation, and then the chunk is the follow-through. And that's the completion of the action. So, her body needs to also follow this, because I really want her to put the full force of her shoulder into pushing this lever. I just like the idea that these levers are ridiculously heavy for no reason. Like, in theory, you probably wouldn't want something like the throttle. Well, actually, maybe you would want... If it was like the throttle of the ship, maybe you don't want the ability to just kind of willy-nilly flip it. I imagine this isn't the type of lever that you push slowly and it actually like starts up the engines and stuff. I really wanted this to be like this is on now, instead of this is, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Yeah, it could be a rusty old bucket too. That's the other thing. I didn't texture it that way, but I definitely should have. And I mean, this is up for many iterations yet, so I'm sure a little rust can get put in somewhere. I also don't like just this arm bendy makes me sad. Because there is no way that your hand just does that. Me. Maddi draws hands with a mouse. I don't think I could do that if I tried. Like, the closest I can get is, I don't know, maybe like 15 degrees in that direction, and that's not a very natural way to push something. This is when I'd get out of my chair and at the embarrassment of myself, like, start trying to move and like probably pick up something and try to rotate in such a way that I could figure it out. A lot of animation requires reference. I would say probably every animation requires reference, and shame on me for not getting a reference for this. She is an alien, that's true. You want to make it believable. I guess there's a difference between it's alien so I can break the laws of physics, and it's alien and I'm breaking the laws of physics because I'm an alien and can do that. Like, as long as it looks right or feels right, it doesn't even have to look right. If it feels right, then you can get away with it, I would say, in my opinion. Like, as long as it looks like the power of her arm is actually pushing this, you should be okay. Yeah, I'm thinking that her elbow... The other problem inherently is that her arm proportions are not human at all. If you look at a person's arm, the distance between their elbow and their shoulder is the same distance, I think, between their elbow and this part of their hand. It's either that or the fingers. I don't remember. And I got short fingers, so it doesn't really help. But in her case, her forearm is much longer than the front part of her arm, the top part. So it does mean that the IK solving it goes, well, this shape looks right, even though I, looking at this, wish that the elbow was way over here. That looks way more natural to me, but that's because that's the proportion of a human arm, not an alien. That is so weird looking at that in 3D. Oh my goodness. I like it. I can try to solve that by rotating it as much as I want, but it still doesn't really help the problem. So I think it means that on this keyframe I have to rotate something so that she doesn't have so much of a weird bend in her arm. So in this case, I'm tempted to look at the hips and rotate them this way so that the weight, draw more lines here, the weight is on this leg. Like I've said in previous streams, I'll probably say this in every single animation stream I ever do. The hips are really important in determining weight. I think, in fact, they're the most important. So I'm tempted to rotate them like this so that this leg supports all the weight. But in this particular case, she's actually pushing all of her weight into something. So I don't want her to look like she's balanced. I actually want her to look like she's unbalanced and that all of her weight is being put into this motion. So this means that I'm basically rotating the opposite direction of what I usually would. And I really wish that maybe I'll make her clip into the table just a little bit. Just a little bit. So that I really get that sense that she's pushing into it. And this arm is out more for balance than it is for anything else. And I don't like this segment, but what are you gonna do? Looks like her fingers are starting to curl already in that part. I might fix that. I definitely need to figure out the timing of this torso and her hips because they're not in sync with the action anymore. I don't want her to start there. Oh, I see. What's happening here? What happens if I just grab this? Yeah, something like that. That's a little bit better. I'm getting the timing this is way too smooth here, this motion. But this has got that kind of kerchunk that I'm looking for. It's still a little off, but that's a good place to stop. So the hips I still need to work on because they are much too smooth. You can tell because even in the dope sheet here, you can see that there's no keyframes at all in any of this. Which in theory, if I gave her a little more anticipation, like maybe she's actually bending down a little bit before she pops up. Something like that. Oh, and then I need her to actually follow through with that motion and not go back another way. I feel like I'm actually going over time right now. Oh my gosh, it's 4:01. 4:04 and I'm gonna lose all my work. Where's my foot? I'm just gonna finish this, I suppose, before I go. There we go. So that's getting closer to what I was thinking. I'm still getting that rotation happening way too early. You can see it rotating here and it shouldn't be, but that's kind of closer to what I was thinking when I was picturing this. Yeah. Anyway, I think I'll call it a day. It's a pretty good spot to leave off. This is me saving my work and hopefully not having anything crash on me. I think the only thing that happened this time was the grease pencil wasn't working. And then it started working and I don't even know how. Oh well. Yeah. That's it for me. If anyone has any questions, just let me know, I suppose. We got some good chat this time, so I appreciate that. Yeah. I don't have any closing remarks. I don't have anything really intelligent or thoughtful, I feel like. But hopefully that was interesting for you. So, yeah. Have a good night, everyone.